So most people who are here or who would watch this probably already know that I was the spiritual advisor for Don Wackerly during his execution. And for the week prior, I was able to visit with Don and speak with him about his practice and about how he wanted to live the last days of his life and how he wished to die, and to prepare the mind for that and create the causes to die in the way that he wished. So within this context, there's a lot of ways to think about this situation. As Buddhists, we intentionally cultivate our ability to choose the way we look at situations. Not that we just kind of make things up as we go along, but with any situation there's many layers of meaning that we can interpret from the situation, and our practice is to kind of take a broader view and decide what perspective is most beneficial, what perspective brings about freedom from afflictions or moves us away from afflictions. So that's something we intentionally cultivate, and I think that that's fairly rare, and for the most part, people who don't have a spiritual practice don't really believe that you can actually do that. I mean, they might say so, but we usually assume that our experience is completely controlled by the external, and we don't really realize how much choosing the way we look at a situation can affect the way we experience it. So in regards to this situation, there are many layers with which we can look. And so if we take just the clear situation that Don was dying, he was being executed, we can focus our mind in on that and use that as our reference point. And if we do that, it has some benefits. We can definitely draw certain Dharma practices out of that, especially being aware of our own death and a little bit of energy to drive to practice more diligently and more honestly within ourselves. But there's also, with that also always comes a risk of falling to an extreme. And with that situation, it can easily become sort of a self-distress, or maybe some sort of intense worry, or I think self-distress would probably be the best word to characterize that. And that, of course, isn't beneficial to anybody. It's not actually helping Don, even though it might seem like it's centered on Don, and you're going, poor Don, he's dying. But really it all comes down to, I'm distressed because I'm suffering because someone I know is dying. And it really is actually all self-centered underneath, although it might look differently to the people around us. So that's one way to perceive the situation, and that's valid and completely appropriate, and can be useful if we make sure we don't fall to self-distress. If we do fall to self-distress, then it's good to change the way we look at the situation and choose a different perspective. And one way to do that would be to open our perspective to the fact that there are all these people involved in the situation. There are executioners, there are the governor and the warden and all these people who are involved in the murder, which is, it is a murder. And in fact, when an inmate is executed, on their death certificate, the cause of death is homicide, because that's what it is. It's a murder, and that's understood. It's just that in this situation, it's a legal murder. It's allowed by the state or the government. So if we open our perspective in that way and take in the broader picture of all these people creating this karma that is quite horrible. And so then, rather than, if our mind is getting distressed and we bring that in, you might think, well, bringing in more suffering into my point of view would just make me more distressed. Why would I want to do that? But in actuality, whenever we broaden our view in any way, the mind settles and more calm is available to us. So if we open up that way, we can start taking in all these people who are actually in a worse position than Don is, because they're creating karma to experience a lot of suffering in the future, far more than Don is experiencing, at the time of his execution. So that sort of broadening can open our minds. But again, we can still take that and go to self-distress if we focus on it in an unhealthy way, if we, as we say, inappropriate attention. So, then we start feeling all this pain for the people who are creating the karma to do this, which is, it's good to have empathy for them. But if we start getting distressed in that situation, if we start experiencing some sort of emotional suffering that we carry from our own side, rather than just an empathetic suffering of understanding the position that these people are in, but actually starting to carry it our own self, then we've fallen to another extreme. And so then it's good, again, to open up our perspective even wider and to realize that all of this, the situation with Don and the situation with the executions, it all actually takes place within the context of samsara. And it's all occurring within this constant ebb and flow of cyclic existence. And in cyclic existence, there is no freedom, there is no security. So this is just one small aspect of that. And it's not actually anything great or special. Murders happen all the time. Deaths happen all the time. And one way to open our mind in this way is to actually bring to mind the situation of Angulimala, who was a great murderer and murdered many people. And in the end, that process culminated in him meeting the Buddha, and in that way led to his arhatship, because he had to meet the Buddha in order to practice the Dharma, in order to become an arhat. But he would have never actually got on the first step of meeting the Buddha if he hadn't had the intention to kill his own mother, in which case the Buddha intervened to keep him from doing that. So it was actually through his murderous intentions that he was able to get there. Not to say that murder is good if it leads to the Dharma, but just to take things into a broader perspective and realize that there is so much complexity to the world we live in, to the cyclic existence of samsara. We never know what horrible things will actually end up in beneficial things. And so it's good not to say, well, I wish all these bad things hadn't happened to me, but to start thinking of it in a broader context and say, well, if these bad things hadn't happened to me in my life, I wouldn't be where I am today. And that's just a fact, because you change one small thing and everything changes. So to broaden our perspective in that way allows us to still feel concerned for Don, still feel concerned for the people who are committing the murder of Don, and at the same time see that in the end, what's important is our practices that lead us away from afflictions. And so whatever gets us there, then that's something we have to recognize, if not as a good thing, at least as a necessity. And I could easily personally see how being involved in a murder in a sort of unwitting way of someone who kind of signed on as a job as a guard in a prison and turning out being the person who has to be overseeing the murder of another human being, I mean, that could be quite emotionally jarring and could actually lead you to start questioning the choices you make in your life. So, yeah, so I guess the point is just choose your view.